I was in the middle of pulling my boots on when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't look. It was a Sunday morning, barely past 9, and the only thing I was focused on was getting out the door before the snowfall got worse. My brother had texted the night before saying brunch started at 11. His wife had apparently made her famous butter tarts, and even though things between us had been strained for months, I figured showing up was the mature thing to do. I've been trying to be the bigger person. I've been trying that for years. I grabbed my phone expecting a reminder about parking, or maybe my mom asking if I was bringing anything. Instead, it was a message from our family's estate lawyer. Do not go to that house. Call me right now. I need to speak with you before you leave. I stood there with one boot half on and read it 3 times. His name had been attached to my family's affairs since my father passed 18 months ago. He was methodical, understated, the kind of man who measured every word. In the 2 years I'd known him professionally, he had never once texted me anything that wasn't a formal document request. And he had absolutely never used those words, do not go. I called him immediately. He picked up on the first ring. Thank you for calling back, he said, his voice the kind of steady that people use when they're actively managing their tone. I need you to sit down if you can. I'm standing in my hallway, I said. What's happening? There's been a filing, he said. I received copies late last night. It came through a firm in Mississauga that I've seen before. Your brother and his wife, they've submitted an application to the Ontario court for a statutory guardianship of property. For you. I laughed. A short, involuntary sound. That's not possible. I'm afraid it is possible. I'm looking at the documents now. They've alleged that you've been exhibiting a pattern of financial mismanagement and cognitive instability, significant enough to warrant emergency intervention. They're claiming you're unfit to manage the inherited assets. That includes your father's cottage property in Muskoka. The cottage. My father's cottage. The one that had been in our family for 22 years. The one where we'd spent every August when we were kids, where Dad had proposed to Mom, where I still had a photo on my phone of him standing at the end of the dock, squinting into the afternoon light. I'm coming over, he said. Don't go anywhere, and don't respond to any messages from your brother or his wife until we've talked. I sat down on the bottom stair in my entryway. The boot I'd been putting on was still in my hand. Outside, the snow had started coming down harder. He arrived 40 minutes later in a gray Canada Goose jacket, stamping slush off his boots at my door, carrying a leather portfolio that looked heavier than it should have. He sat across from me at my kitchen table and opened it without preamble. Before I show you this, he said, I want you to read it the way you would read a legal notice from a stranger. I know that's not easy, but emotion is going to cloud what I need you to see. I nodded. I had a coffee in front of me that I wasn't drinking. The first page was the application itself. My name appeared on it as the subject, respondent. Described as a person 18 years of age or older who may be incapable of managing property, signed by my brother and co-signed by his wife. Filed under the Substitute Decisions Act. The second page was an evidentiary schedule, a list of incidents. The first item on the list stopped me cold. Incident dated October 12th, respondent became emotionally dysregulated and agitated during family gathering at Fairview Memorial Cemetery, Barrie, ON. Respondent required physical steadying by attendees. Respondent appeared disheveled and emotionally unstable. Photo evidence attached. I flipped to the attached photo. It was taken from the side at my father's burial. I was standing by the grave and I looked like a mess. My coat was dark and damp across one shoulder and part of my sleeve. My hair was escaping from where I pinned it, and my expression was the kind of slack-jawed shock that reads to a stranger, like someone unraveling. I stared at that photo for a long time before the memory came back to me fully. It had rained that morning, a cold October drizzle, and my brother's wife had been standing just slightly behind me for most of the service. At some point, she leaned over to say something to me, something I couldn't even remember now. And in doing so, she tipped the thermos she was carrying, a big stainless steel travel thermos, directly onto my shoulder. Hot coffee. Not enough to burn, but enough to soak through my coat immediately. I'd gasped. I'd turned. She grabbed my arm and said loudly, "Oh, honey, you okay? You're shaking. Are you shaking?" And several people had looked over. I hadn't been shaking. I had coffee down my sleeve. She'd staged the photograph. She'd used the most photographed moment of my life, my father's funeral, to manufacture evidence. She hadn't slipped. She had waited for the exact right moment, tipped that thermos with precision, and let the cameras do the rest. She wasn't clumsy. She was building a file. She did this on purpose, I said. My voice came out very flat. At the funeral. He didn't answer right away. He slid 3 more pages toward me. An affidavit from someone who described themselves as a longtime family friend who I'd genuinely never met. A list of allegedly missed financial obligations, a property tax installment for the Muskoka cottage, supposedly paid late, a Canada Revenue Agency correspondence I'd supposedly ignored, and a log of what they described as erratic communication, screenshots of text messages, taken so far out of context they looked like they were from a different conversation entirely. Then he placed the last item on the table, a property assessment for the cottage. The number was $1.4 million. I looked at it. I'd known abstractly that property values in Muskoka had gone up since Dad bought the land in the early 2000s. I hadn't sat down and looked at what it was actually worth now, and Dad's will had left it to me. Not split, to me. He'd been explicit about it. I was the one who'd visited every summer without fail, who'd helped him repair the dock 2 years before he got sick, who'd been named sole beneficiary of that specific asset. My brother had contested the will and lost. And now apparently he'd found another way. They're not saying I'm irresponsible, I said slowly. They're saying I'm incapable. That's different. It is different, he said. If they can convince a judge you're incapable of managing property, the court can appoint a statutory guardian. That guardian oversees and can ultimately authorize the sale of assets to cover perceived obligations or care costs. And my brother would apply to be that guardian. He's already indicated intent. It's in the filing. I closed the folder. I pressed my hands flat on the table and looked out at the snow. I was 31 years old. I worked as a project coordinator for a municipal infrastructure firm in Guelph. I had a line of credit I'd never fully drawn on, a spotless credit score, and an RRSP I'd been contributing to since I was 24. I was the least financially chaotic person I knew. And my brother, who had borrowed money from my father twice and never repaid either amount, was currently sitting in his house in Brampton preparing butter tarts for a brunch I was supposed to walk into. Before I tell you the rest, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this reaches. I asked to see the full evidence package. I read every page, and then I opened my laptop. If they'd manufactured a paper trail of my incompetence, they'd had to leave traces. Paper trails go both ways. The property tax claim was first. They were alleging I'd missed the second installment of the Muskoka property tax in April. I pulled up my banking records and found the transfer confirmation in under 4 minutes. Paid on time, confirmation number attached, filed to the right branch of the municipal office. Then the CRA correspondence. I searched my email going back 14 months, found the original notice, found my accountant's response, found the confirmation of resolution. All of it documented, all of it clean. Then I looked at the affidavit from the family friend. The name meant nothing to me, but the description they gave of the incident, the specific language used, matched almost word for word a voice note I'd once left for my brother during a stressful period the previous spring. A voice note I'd sent privately about my own anxiety around the estate settlement that I had not sent to anyone else. He'd taken my private thoughts and handed them to a stranger to weaponize into a legal document. I sat back. The coldness that moved through me wasn't grief. It wasn't even anger yet. It was something more precise than that. It was the feeling of seeing a pattern emerge from data that should have been random. They'd been planning this for a while. I checked the timestamp on the property assessment in his file. It had been requested 8 weeks ago. The family friend affidavit had been notarized 6 weeks ago. The filing itself was 2 weeks old, which meant they'd been sitting on it, timing it, waiting for the right moment to serve it. The brunch invitation had come 3 days after the filing date. They hadn't invited me over for butter tarts. They had invited me over to serve me papers in person, in their home, surrounded by people they'd primed to see me as unstable. I pulled up the Ontario estate law section on my browser and read for an hour while he sat across from me, working quietly on his own notes. And then the doorbell rang. I checked the Ring camera on my phone. Standing on my porch in a red puffer jacket with her hood pulled up against the snow was my niece. She was 16. She had her bike helmet tucked under one arm, despite the fact that there was no way she'd ridden here in this weather, which meant she'd left in a hurry and grabbed it out of habit. She looked like she'd been crying, and her eyes were doing that thing where they keep moving, checking the street, checking behind her. I opened the door. "They don't know I'm here," she said immediately, stepping inside. "I told them I was going to Mara's house. Don't tell them I came here." "Okay," I said. Come in, take your jacket off. I got her settled at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a granola bar she didn't eat. He excused himself to the living room to give us space. She kept her hands wrapped around the mug and didn't speak for a full minute, just stared at the steam. Then she said, Mom told me I had to. I waited. There was an affidavit. She printed it out. She sat me down and told me it was to help you, that you needed help, and that this was how the family could get you the support you needed. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red. She said it was to protect you. She said if I didn't sign it, she'd cancel my respart. She's been contributing to it since I was little. My whole university fund. I felt something solidify in my chest. Not anger. Fury. But I kept my face still because she didn't need my fury. She needed me to stay calm. I signed it, she said. Her voice broke on the last word. I'm sorry. I said things that weren't true. I said you've been unstable around me, that you'd said scary things. You've never done anything like that. You've always been the only one who actually talks to me like I'm a person. And I lied about you, and I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine. You were threatened, I said. You're 16. You did what you had to do to protect yourself. That's not on you. She swallowed hard. I brought something. She pulled her phone out of her jacket pocket. Her hands were shaking slightly. Dad does all his calls through the home tablet when he thinks nobody's listening. He forgets it backs up to the shared family cloud account. Mom set it up 2 years ago to sync photos and he never changed the settings. She turned the phone toward me. I found this 3 weeks ago. I didn't know what to do with it. And then I found out about the filing and I knew I had to bring it to you. She pressed play. My brother's voice came through the speaker, slightly tinny, slightly too loud the way recordings of home conversations always are. He was speaking to his wife. We need to move faster. The spring session starts in March, and if we don't have a guardian appointed by then, she could list the property herself, and we get nothing. His wife's voice, crisp and even. The filing's in. Let's see how she handles the service. If she reacts publicly, we use it. If she doesn't, we just need 2 more supporting statements, and the judge has to consider it. My brother, what about her? He meant my niece. She signed it? She signed it. She didn't want to, but she signed it. Good, she's a good kid. She'll understand when she's older. His wife again, quieter but still clear. Once the guardianship is in place, we can list through the Bracebridge office. The agent already knows the situation. 60 days to close. It's clean. The recording ended. The kitchen was very quiet. I looked at my niece. She was watching me with the expression of someone who had been carrying something far too heavy and had finally been allowed to set it down. I thought about what it had cost her to come here. The courage that required at 16, in the snow with her university funds sitting on the other side of this decision. I thought about what she'd be watching if I lost. She'd watch them celebrate. She'd watch the cottage sold, the money disappear into her father's debt, and she'd learn, really learn, in the way you only learn from watching, that manipulation works, that threatening the people you're supposed to protect is an effective strategy, that the people who stay quiet and play the long game are the ones who win. I wasn't going to let that be her lesson. You did the right thing, I said. I mean that. What you just did took more courage than most adults I know. She wiped her face with her sleeve. Now I need you to let me make a call, I said. And then I need you to stay here tonight, if you can. I called him back into the kitchen. I played the recording. I watched his expression shift from careful, professional neutrality into something that looked almost like grim satisfaction. He pulled out his legal pad. We worked through the rest of the afternoon. The property tax discrepancy was easy to dismantle. My records were clean and time-stamped. The CRA correspondence the same. The family friend affidavit, once I'd identified the language as originating from my private voice note, gave us grounds for a serious counterclaim about the provenance of evidence. And the recording, depending on whether it qualified under Ontario's private communications rules, which he believed it did given the parties involved, was potentially admissible as evidence of coordinated fraud. But I wasn't primarily interested in the legal counterfiling. Not yet. Because buried in the property records he pulled that morning was something my brother clearly hadn't found. When my father had applied for a conservation land tax incentive through the province back in 2009, a program that exempted certain rural properties from development levies in exchange for maintained natural land use, he'd signed a covenant, a registered covenant on title. It ran with the land. It restricted any commercial development, subdivision, or significant structural alteration of the property in perpetuity, unless the landowner applied to the province for a formal withdrawal, which required environmental assessment and a minimum 2-year process. My brother hadn't just tried to steal a cottage. He'd been negotiating with a buyer who was going to build on land that could not legally be built on, and my brother, who had been involved enough in my father's estate to have seen the title records, almost certainly knew. We were no longer talking about a guardianship application. We were talking about fraud on a buyer, misrepresentation of property, and potentially obstruction of the estate administration process. I made a decision. I was not going to fight the guardianship application publicly. I wasn't going to file an immediate counter-motion, issue a statement, or call anyone. I was going to do exactly what my brother expected, a flustered, unprepared, possibly unstable younger sister to do. I was going to go quiet. 2 weeks later, I appeared at a briefcase conference and agreed, without argument, to a limited temporary administrator arrangement over the cottage property pending further assessment. My brother looked like he'd won the Stanley Cup. His wife kept her expression neutral, but I could see the relief in her posture. His lawyers submitted a request to move forward with a property management review, which would allow them to list the cottage. The listing went up on a Thursday. On Monday, a notice of covenant was filed against the listing by the Provincial Conservation Authority after I contacted them directly to flag a potential unauthorized development transaction. On Wednesday, the prospective buyers, who had apparently been told the covenant had lapsed, contacted their own solicitor, who contacted the province directly and confirmed the covenant was not only active but had been registered as a Schedule B designation, meaning it was fully binding on any future owner. On Thursday afternoon, the buyers launched a complaint through the Real Estate Council of Ontario naming my brother's wife, who had signed the listing agreement as co-vendor. On Friday morning, an investigator from the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services knocked on my brother's door. I wasn't there to see it, but my niece texted me that afternoon. 3 words, all lowercase, had happened, didn't it? I replied, yes, you okay? She said, yeah, I think so. The guardianship application was formally withdrawn 10 days later. The legal counterclaim, which we filed the same week as the withdrawal, alleged conspiracy to commit fraud, misrepresentation of estate assets, and financial coercion of a minor, the last point specifically because of what my niece had been put through. My lawyer believed that coercion piece was going to be the most serious piece of the whole thing when it finally made it to court. You don't threaten a 16-year-old's education fund to procure a false affidavit and walk away clean. My brother called me once, 3 weeks after everything collapsed. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded tired and smaller than I'd ever heard him. He said he'd made mistakes. He said his wife had pushed things further than he'd intended. He said he hoped we could eventually talk. I didn't call back, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I had finally, at 31, understood the difference between forgiveness and access. I could forgive him privately, in my own time, without ever handing him another way in. The cottage came fully back into my name in February. I drove up on a Thursday afternoon in the early thaw, the highway north of Barrie still icy in patches, and I sat on the dock in my winter jacket for about 20 minutes, looking at the lake. The ice was just starting to loosen at the edges, that particular gray-blue of frozen water beginning to go soft. Dad used to say you could tell spring was really coming, not by the temperature but by the sound of the ice, the low groan of it shifting in the night. My niece came up that weekend. We made pasta and watched a movie, and she asked me if I was going to sell. No, I said. She nodded like she'd already known that. Good, she said. It should stay in the family. I thought about that for a while after she was asleep. What family actually means. Not the legal category, not the shared last name, not even the shared memories, but the people who show up in a snowstorm to tell you the truth when it would be easier, safer, and considerably warmer to stay home. Some things you inherit, some things you earn. And sometimes the most important thing you can protect isn't the asset itself. It's the person on the other side of it who still believes honesty matters. That's what my father left me. Not just the cottage. That. I've been thinking about what it actually takes to hold your ground when the people dismantling you are the same ones who are supposed to have your back. It's not strength in the way people usually picture it. It's not raising your voice or going on the offensive or sending the angry text you drafted at 2 a.m. What it actually takes is something quieter and harder than any of that. It's the ability to see clearly when everything in you wants to react. To read a court filing with your father's name on the cover page and not fall apart. To sit across from a 16-year-old who came to you in the snow, shaking, and choose to be steady for her even when your own hands aren't entirely steady either. That's what I learned from all of this. Not a lesson that arrived neatly. More like something that settled into place over weeks, the way ice loosens in early spring, gradually, and then all at once. My brother made his choices based on what he assumed I was. He assumed I was emotional, where he was calculated, reactive, where he was patient, easy to destabilize because I'd always been the one in the family who wore things more openly. He built his entire strategy around that assumption, and he was wrong. Not because I'm tougher than I look, but because I'd spent years in work that required me to think carefully before acting, to follow evidence instead of instinct, to understand that the right move and the satisfying move are almost never the same thing. That's the part that I think people miss when they hear a story like this. They want to hear about the confrontation, the moment you look the person in the eye and say what you know. But the real turning point wasn't dramatic at all. It was sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad, pulling bank records, and choosing not to call him. Choosing to let the paper trail speak. Choosing to be the kind of person the evidence would eventually vindicate instead of the kind of person who burns the whole thing down because they have every right to. My niece did something that night that I don't think she fully understands yet. She didn't just bring me a recording, she chose honesty at the exact moment it cost her something real. Her college fund, her parents' approval, the comfortable story she'd been told about why any of this was happening. She was 16 and she rode her bike in the snow and she told the truth anyway. That takes a kind of moral backbone that I've seen grown adults fail to produce when the stakes were much lower. What I hope she takes from this, what I'd want her to carry forward, is that those three things are connected. Knowing right from wrong matters, thinking carefully enough to act on it effectively matters, and showing up when it's hard, when nobody's watching, when there's something real to lose. That matters most of all. Not because the universe rewards virtue in any tidy or guaranteed way, but because when you live like that consistently, over time you build something inside yourself that other people can't touch. Not even in court. Not even with a filing and a lawyer and a listing agreement already in someone's desk drawer. The cottage is still standing. The ice on that lake is going to break up in a few weeks, same as it does every year. And I'll be there when it does.